In this video, I'm going to be showing you the step-by-step guide on how to complete every single NPC quest in Elden Ring so that you've got all of the guides in one place to go and complete all of these quest lines and get all of the various unique rewards and overpowered weapons to, of course, destroy the DLC. So yes, it is going to be a bit of a longer video, but don't worry, everything is going to be timestamped, so if you are here just for simply one or two quest lines, feel free to check the description or hover over the video and find the relevant quest that you're looking for. And just to give you a quick heads up, some quests feature multiple NPCs and interfere with other quest lines, but I will tell you at the beginning of the relevant quest how it affects the game and what NPCs are included. So of course, feel free to save this video, bookmark it, and feel free to come back to it as and when you please. But if you don't mind me asking you to leave a like rating on it, if it does help you out in any way, that will be greatly appreciated as it helps out the channel tremendously. But that's obviously enough said for that intro. Let's now jump into these incredible quest lines. Now, these quests aren't going to be in any chronological order, so like I said in the intro, if you're looking for a certain quest, feel free to scan the video or use a description to go over to that relevant quest you're looking for. But I did want to start this video off with one of my favourite quest lines in the game, or at least the quest that gives you one of the best items available in my opinion, and that is going to be Yura's quest line. This one does not interfere with the game at all and can be essentially done at any time, and the reward for completing it is not only a couple of smithing stones along the way, but also Eleonora's pole blade, which is quite possibly one of the best weapons in the entire game. Now, of course, to start off Yura's questline, you do need to find him, and the first place where you can find Yura is just south of Agil Lake. After speaking to him here, he will basically warn you of Agil Lake and Agil himself, which is the dragon that drops down if you go to a certain point in the lake, and you can simply skip past this step if you don't want to take on Agil yet and head down this particular ravine. That is because in this ravine is a cave called Murkwater Cave, and as soon as you reach the opening for that cave, you will then be invaded by Bloody Finger Neregus. After about 30 seconds or so of this fight, Yura himself will actually help you out and join the fight. Again, you don't have to wait for Yura to come in, he is just someone that will help you out if you're struggling, but either way, once you've defeated Neregus, if you head further into the ravine, so past Murkwater Cave, you will then find Yura again under the rubble that is above, to which you can exhaust his dialogue and move on to the next step. And the next step is heading over to Raya Lucaria Academy, more specifically to the main Academy Gate Site of Grace. That's because once you're here, you'll obviously notice the two symbols you can use as teleporters in and out of Raya Lucaria, and if you simply walk past the one that's facing the Altus Plateau and the Dector's Lift, you can go behind it and find a red summon symbol, to which you can invade yet another Bloody Finger and aid Yura in this fight. But once you complete it, you'll be given the Raven Mist Ash of War, and Yura will be available to talk to once you teleport back to your own world. It is important and imperative that you speak to Yura at this location and exhaust all of his dialogue. So once you've come back to your own world after defeating the Bloody Finger, just make sure that you find Yura, who is on that same sort of segment of the bridge where the red summon sign was, and as I say, exhaust all of his dialogue, get the smithing stone as your reward, and now we can work our way to the Altus Plateau. And just as a quick guide for those of you that maybe don't know how to get yourself to the Altus Plateau, there's two ways you can do so. One is by collecting two pieces of the medallion that's used for the Dector's Lift. One piece is found in Fort Height and the other piece is found in Fort Feroth in Limgrave and Caelid respectively. Again, I'll be showing you those locations on screen right now. But the other way, and is kind of the way I don't recommend you going, especially if you've just started your game and you're really low level, is going through the strewn precipice and beating the Magma Worm Makar to reach the Altus Plateau that way. But again, like I say, it's going to be a boss fight if you go that way, and it is a little bit tough, so I highly recommend getting the two pieces of the medallion so you can use the Dector's Lift. And then once you do that and have access to the Altus Plateau, we then need to make our way to the second Church of Marika, which is located right here in the middle of Altus Plateau, to which you will find Yura in a bit of a sorry state, and after exhausting all of his dialogue and unfortunately seeing him pass, not only will you be able to pick up his Nagakiba, but you will then be immediately immediately invaded by Eleonora herself. Again, this is going to be a little bit of a tough fight as she uses the Dragon Communion spells as well as the Pole Blade itself to deal quite a substantial amount of damage, so definitely make sure that you're prepared to bring something like a Bloodhound Fang to this fight. And then once you do defeat Eleonora, not only will you get that Pole Blade that I mentioned at the beginning, which is possibly the best weapon in the game, but you also get the Purifying Crystal tier, which is actually used for Mohg, the Lord of Blood in Mohgwyn's Palace, to negate the damage he does in his transition phase, which of course is extremely useful for that specific fight. But once you've done that and beaten Eleonora and got all of those items, that is Yura's quest complete. And I do just want to say this right now because I can already see right in the comments, well, you don't actually need to do any of this to fight Eleonora, and you're sort of right because there's multiple ways of getting Eleonora to spawn in. Essentially, the quickest way to do that is to obviously do this quest as I've shown you. So as soon as you get to the Outer Plateau, complete Yura's quest and then you'll have her spawn in. But there's also two other ways you can get her to spawn, and that's by one, defeating Yura and killing him off before you actually even complete the quest, but also going to the mountain tops of the giants. So in your games, if you haven't even spoken to Yura yet, but have made your way to the mountain tops of the giant where the fire giant resides, even if you've just used the lift and stepped 1 foot into the mountain tops of the giants, Yura actually becomes Shibiri, or Shibiri uses Yura's body, again quote unquote killing off Yura, triggering Eleonora to spawn. So there's 3 ways to get Eleonora to spawn in your game: complete the quest, kill Yura, or go to the mountain tops of the giants. But if you of course want to get Eleonora's Pole Blade nice and early, I do recommend doing this quest, as you will also get all of the other items like the Rapture of Mist, Ash of War, and the Reduvia from the Regis as well. So it's definitely worth going through the full quest and getting those specific items. But now that that quest line's done, we can now move on to something else. And the next quest line that I want to jump into is actually going to be Ranni's quest line. And I'm just going to say this before we go any further. With Ranni's questline, there are multiple NPCs involved, including Blythe the Half-Wolf and also Prospector Seluvis. Seluvis has his own separate questline, and if you go too far into Ranni's, you actually make it so you cannot complete Seluvis' quest anymore. Again, I'll point out where that point in Ranni's quest is, and also specifically for Blythe the Half-Wolf, there are a lot of steps that are not mandatory for his quest during Ranni's quest, but essentially by completing Ranni's questline, you will also be in tangent completing Blythe's questline. So I just want to preface this by saying I'm not going to show you every single location where you can physically meet Blythe, because there is a lot in the beginning of the game especially where you can find him in various locations, and he's more giving you an idea of the lore and what Ranni's quest is actually all about, as opposed to actually giving you any significant items. And of course, with this guide, I'm trying to let you complete the quest as quickly as possible, so I am going to gloss over most of Blythe's locations. So in order to start Ranni's quest, you can actually do that almost immediately in your game, because as soon as you get Torrent from Milena after speaking to her at the Gatefront site of Grace, you can then head back to the Church of Ely, where you can speak to Ranni, to which she will tell you about Spirit Calling. Again, exhaust all of her dialogue and she will also give you the Lone Wolf Ashes, as well as the bell that you need to call upon summons in boss fights. And then essentially from this point onwards, you need to make your way to Carrier Manor and fight through that so you can get to Ranni's Rise. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning, you can also speak to Blythe beforehand in Mistwood, or more specifically the Mistwood Ruins, but none of that is necessary, because once you meet Ranni in Ranni's Rise, you can then pledge your allegiance to Ranni and start her quest officially at this point, to which there will be phantoms at the bottom of Ranni's Rise, and Blythe, E.G. and Prospector Seluvis are all 3 of those phantoms. Again, you do need to speak to these phantoms and rest at the site of Grace, which is in this rise, so then you can teleport back out. And then essentially the next step is to go and defeat the Star Scourge Radahn. There is actually one thing you need to do before you can access Radahn, and that is making your way to the Outer's Plateau. Again, there's 2 ways you can do that. Either 1, getting both parts of the medallion to use the Dectus Lift, which are in Fort Hate and Fort Feroth respectively, respectively, or you can go through the precipice, beat Magma Makar and go to Altus Plateau that way. Either way, as soon as you get into Altus Plateau, activate any Site of Grace in that area, and that will unlock the ability to use the portal that is just next to the impassable Great Bridge Site of Grace. This portal will take you inside of Redmane Castle, where you can attend the Radahn Festival. And hey, look at that, guess who's joining us? Blythe. So like I said before, you don't actually need to interact with Blythe at all until this point, because he will just turn up at the festival as scripted by the game. So your next step is to go and defeat Radahn, and you can either do that by yourself or call upon multiple summons that are in the boss arena. But either way, once you defeat Radahn, a cutscene will play, because essentially Radahn is holding back the stars, and where he's now no longer with us, one of the stars is able to collide with the grounds in Limgrave and open up a brand new area. Again, after completing the Radahn fight, you can speak to Blythe atop the hill next to the Site of Grace, and he will tell you that that area has now opened up a passage to Nokron, the Eternal City. So exhaust Blythe's dialogue and then head back to Ranni in Ranni's Rise, and she will ask you to now go and collect a special item from that area, being the Finger Slayer Blade. And at this point, this is where Seluvis Quest could potentially become unavailable for you, because if you go and collect the Finger Slayer Blade and give it back to Ranni, that will end Seluvis Quest. So if you've got this far into your game and this far into the quest, I highly recommend now that you go and complete Seluvis Questline before then coming back to Ranni's, because like I say, if you go any further from this point, you are not going to be able to complete Seluvis Quest. But if you've done that, or you're not too bothered about Seluvis, so you just want to carry on, you can go to the red marker that will now be on your map, and essentially you can go through that area. It is relatively linear, going over various rooftops, but more specifically from the Ancestral Woods Site of Grace, you will be able to drop down again onto various rooftops, and then as soon as you go outside and go past the Night Sacred Ground Site of Grace, you can then head up the walkway and go and pick up the Finger Slaying Blade. Again, once you've obtained this, head back to Ranni and give her the blade, and she will thank you, and upon exhausting all of her dialogue and speaking to her multiple times, she will then give you the inverted statue. This statue is the key to the next part of the quest, because now, once we've got that, we need to head over to the Carrion Study Hall and put that statue on the pedestal right in front of the Site of Grace. This essentially will turn the study hall upside down, to which we can traverse through it again and wrap around the edges until you get to this point, where again you can drop down onto the chandeliers and the beams to use the elevator that is in the middle. Once you've done that, you will then be able to head outside and make your way to the Divine Tower of Liurnia, where at the top you will be able to find the Curse Mark of Death. And again, once you've collected that curse mark, you can head back to Ranni, to which you will find she's actually gone on a walkabout. She's disappeared. But once you've realised that she's gone missing, you will also come to realise that Renna's Rise, the tower that's north of Ranni's Rise, has now also opened up. This was previously gated off with a magic barrier, but now that we've got the Curse Mark of Death, this is now open, to which you can climb the ladder. And just as a little side note, as soon as you climb the ladder, there is a chest right behind you which you can open up for Ranni's costume if you want to rock that for whatever reason. But at the top of the tower will be a teleporter, and that teleporter will take you to All Palace. Now, as soon as you've used the teleporter and woken up on this riverbank, there will be an item right in front of you in those sort of like stone coffins. Pick that up, because that is actually going to be Ranni's doll. And then with the Site of Grace, which is just nearby, sit down and talk to Ranni's doll 3 times to get Ranni to eventually speak. And then from this point on, we just simply need to go through the old ruins to then go through Nokstella, the Eternal City, until we reach Blythe's Phantom. Now this Phantom is a little bit tricky because it is quite aggressive, and it does hit hard, as well as having the Destined Death effect on its weapon. So like I say, do prepare for this fight. It can be a little bit tricky, but once you do defeat the Phantom, Ranni will thank you for fighting so well and actually present you with a discarded key. This key is of course important, and I'll come back to it in a moment, but I highly suggest progressing through the next area, as that is going to be the Lake of Rot. So simply either run through there and spam your Estus flask to make sure that you don't die from the Scarlet Rot, or use the relevant buttons to obviously lift lift certain areas so it's safer to cross, because at the other end will be the Grand Cloister, and again, after traversing through there, you can use the coffin that is at the very end to teleport to a secret Astel boss. And again, yes, you are going to need to defeat this Astel boss, which can be a little bit tricky if you're underleveled, but if you've got a nice heavy hard-hitting strength weapon, this boss shouldn't be too much of a problem. And again, after defeating Astel, you should then see that there is a nice blue barriered off area, which is actually where we need to go to meet Ranni for the final time. Luckily for us, after defeating the Astel boss, there will be a site of grace here, and if you remember, with that discarded key, that actually opens up a secret chest that is actually residing in the Raya Lucaria Grand Library, which is where Rennala is. So yes, I know I've kind of glossed over this, but you do need to defeat Rennala so that you can have access to this area, and in all honesty, if you've defeated everything else so far, Rennala should be a breeze, but you can use that discarded key to open up the chest that's inside, to which you can pick up the Dark Moon Ring. This ring will then open up that barrier from the Astel fight. So now that you've obtained that, you can head back to that Astel site of grace, go past that once closed off barrier, and use the lift to head up to the Moonlight Altar area. From here, if you just head straight north up the hill, you will then be met by the Cathedral of Manor, and more specifically, the dragon that will phase in being a jeweler. Again, this particular dragon fight can be a little bit tricky, but it is also optional because you can just run past the dragon if you want and use the site of grace that's inside the cathedral, because next to the site of grace will be a hole that you can essentially jump down into, and again, traversing down the tunnels, you will then find Ranni sat in front of the two fingers. And with the ring that we picked up previously, if you interact with Ranni and give her the ring back, that will then activate a cutscene which essentially completes Ranni's quest line, and after speaking to her after the cutscene, she will then give you the Dark Moon Greatsword. But we're not quite finished just yet, because as I mentioned at the beginning, Blythe's quest still is sort of like entangled with Ranni's quest. So after doing all of these steps and essentially completing Ranni's quest, we can head back to Ranni's Rise, where Blythe will be found outside, and there's a lot of Black Knife assassins' bodies all over the floor, because essentially Blythe is still protecting Ranni's tower. But he's gone a little bit rampant in that fact, and because we've now turned up, he is also trying to defeat us. So we need to unfortunately put him down, and once we do so, we will also get his armor set along with the Royal Greatsword, which is his greatsword. And for those of you that don't know, if you go back to Seluvis' tower and climb up the ladder, but then jump out onto this broken wall, you will also be able to pick up Blythe's mask. So I highly recommend that you do this after completing Ranni's quest, because then that will put an end to Blythe's quest and you get all of his items too. And of course, you'll be able to use Ranni's ending at the very end of the game by summoning her in after defeating the Elden Beast. Again, I'm not going to show that here, I'll let you go and do that so that you can watch the cutscene and enjoy it for yourself, but essentially those are all of the steps that are necessary to complete Ranni's and Blythe's quest all in full. And we're actually going to be keeping with the magic theme with the next quest in this video, and that's because we are going to show you the steps for Sellen's questline next. And again, with this particular questline, there are two NPCs involved. That's going to be Sellen and also Jeren, which will feature later on in this quest, but this questline does not affect any other quest. This can be done at any time, even after completing the game, because again, these NPCs don't affect anything else. So obviously, to get this questline started, we need to find Sellen first of all, and she is located in the Waypoint Ruins, so you need to defeat the Pumpkinhead boss that is guarding the door, and then once you do so, you can open said door to meet Sorceress Sellen. Speak to her here and purchase a few of her spells, and she will basically continue to tell her backstory about Raya Lucaria Academy and how she got kicked out. She also wants us to explore the lands and experience magic elsewhere, and that is essentially the next step, because we need to go and find Sorcerer Azure. Now, Sorcerer Azure is located in the Outis Plateau, and again, to get to the Outis Plateau, you can go through the precipice and defeat Magma Worm Makar, or you can get the two parts of the Dectus Medallion in Fort Height and Fort Feroth to then be able to use the Grand Lift of Dectus. But Either way, whichever route you take to get to the Altis Plateau, we need to make our way to the Hermit Village. And the best way to do so is to go from the Erdtree Gazing Hill site of Grace, and then we can basically wrap around the Seethe Water River, past Fort Lade, and through to the Hermit Village. So we're going on a sort of like massive ring road leading up to Hermit Village. That is because as soon as you go through Hermit Village, you will be met with a demi-human boss, which has also got a bunch of sorcerers around them. But again, you can skip that particular boss fight and just run to the site of Grace that's behind them, because that is where Primeval Sorcerer Azure is located. And after interacting with Azure, he will actually give you the spell Comet Azure. Once you have obtained that spell, you can then head back to Sorcerer Sellen, to which she will explain that there is another Primeval Sorcerer in Sorcerer Lusat, and she asks you to go and find him as well. So once you've exhausted all of her dialogue, you can then accept that mission to go and find Lusat, and Sellen will give you the key to access the area where he is. And that location is actually hidden away in Celia Hideaway. This cave itself is also behind an illusionary wall, but it is directly underneath Fort Feroth, so if you either come from Fort Feroth or even the Church of Plague, you will find a lonely mage actually guarding the entrance, and once you defeat him, you can then go straight behind the throne that he was standing in front of to then hit the illusionary wall and of course reveal the cave behind. And again, inside this cave there are going to be multiple illusionary walls, so just traverse through there, make sure that you roll or hit every wall possible to then come to this grand opening where there's a whole bunch of massive crystals. Go down this particular crystal, which is the largest of the lot and goes down to the bottom of the cave, and at the bottom will be a similar symbol to that of the Raya Lucaria Academy gates, to which you can then use the key that Sellen gave you to go through that magic barrier and meet Lusat. Again, much like Azure, if you interact with Lusat, he will give you a certain spell, this time being the Stars of Ruin, and as soon as you've got that spell, you can then head straight back to Sellen. At this point, there will be multiple pieces of dialogue that you can listen to, one of which obviously saying that you've done the mission, but then another important dialogue where she has another favour to ask. This favour is to find her actual body, as she reveals that the person you're speaking to right now is just a mere hologram, and her physical form is actually hidden away in Witchbane Ruins, which is in the south of Limgrave. So we need to head over to those ruins and speak with the real Sellen that has resided and trapped in this ruins. She will then ask you to actually take her heart out of her body so that she can escape captivity, and explains that somebody is out to get her. And as you probably remember from the intro of this quest line, that particular person happens to be Jeren. Jeren is the leader of the Radahn Festival, so at this point in your game you do need to actually attend the Radahn Festival and defeat Radahn to then head back to the castle once more and speak to Jeren upon his throne. Again, once you've exhausted all of his dialogue, we can then go back to Witchbane Ruins where the real Sellen body is located, to which now Jeren is in this location and has actually slain that body. Speak to Jeren here and he will actually explain that Sellen is a terrible person and no one should be helping her, but he also understands that her energy was not in that body and could potentially pop up again in the future. And well, unluckily for Jeren, that is exactly what is going to happen, because the next and sort of final step that we need to do is find Sellen a third body. And luckily for us, there is a certain Prospector Seluvis who delves into puppets, and if we go into his hidden lair that is in the ruins, that is sort of in between all of the different rises behind Carrier Manor, there is going to be once again an illusionary wall that will reveal a staircase down into Seluvis's secret lair. Again, there is yet another illusionary wall down the middle of said lair that will then reveal Sellen's third body. With this body, we can interact with it and put her heart back into that body, to which Sellen will thank us and reveal that she is going to go back to Raya Lucaria Academy. At this point, you do need to defeat Renala, the main boss in Raya Lucaria Academy, because just outside of her boss rooms, so once you take the elevator up to the Raya Lucaria Grand Library, just outside of the main door, you will now have two summon signs, one of which will be to join and help Sellen defeat Jeren, which is the one on the right hand side in gold, but then the other one is to do the opposite and help Jeren defeat Sellen. I personally recommend that you actually side with Sellen in this quest line, because once you do so and defeat Jeren, not only will you get Jeren's eccentric garms, but you will also be given the glintstone Chris as a result of helping Sellen. Like I say, if you side with Sellen, you'll be able to get both rewards essentially, as you wouldn't get the eccentric set if you decide to side with Jeren. And then after exhausting all of Sellen's dialogue after the fight, you can then rest at the site of grace, which is in this room, to which you'll be transformed into one of those sort of like balls of the various different Raya Lucaria masks, and you will actually be able to pick up her mask, which is going to be residing on the floor in front of her. And although she's in this sort of like weird state now, she is still going to be there for the rest of the game to purchase sorceries from, so her shop will always be available as well by completing her quest. Once you've done all of that and turned Sellen into this absolute monstrosity, that is the end of Sellen's quest. Now for this next quest, we're going to move away from the magic and Raya Lucaria theme that's currently going on, and we're actually going to discuss the steps required for Alexander the Great's questline. Alexander's quest doesn't interfere with anybody else's, but it is missable. If you go too far in your game and don't actually interact with Alexander enough, you can physically miss this questline, and I advise that you don't do so, because he probably gives one of the best rewards in the Shard of Alexander's Talisman. So let me tell you how you obviously don't miss out on that. To start Alexander's quest, we first of all need to meet him in this specific location in Limgrave. It's just east of the War Master's shack, and next to the pond you can see Alexander, who's going to be stuck in this hole, unfortunately. After speaking to him, he asks if we can help him out, and of course we can do so just by using a charged heavy attack to pop him out of this hole. For doing so, you'll get a gesture as well as the exalted flesh, and he will tell you about this amazing festival that he's going to, which is actually the Radahn festival. Now, you can actually meet Alexander once again if you go through the Gale tunnel in Caelid, which is right here, but it is not necessary. In fact, the first interaction that I just showed you is not necessary at all, but is worth it if obviously you're trying to collect all the gestures, etc. But Alexander will actually go to this next step no matter what, because the first sort of like trigger point for his quest line is attending the Radahn festival. And again, in order to get to the Radahn festival, you do need to make your way to the Outers Plateau and use one of the Sight of Graces in Outers Plateau. Again, you can get there by getting the Dectus Medallion, to which the two parts of that are in Fort Height and Fort Feroth respectively, or you can go through the Strewn Precipice and beat the Magma Worm Makar and head up that way to the Outers Plateau. Either way, once you get to the Outers Plateau and use a Sight of Grace, you can then come over to the impassable Great Bridge Sight of Grace, which is at the south of Caelid, and just next to this Sight of Grace you will see that the teleporter gate is now available to use, and that teleporter will take you straight into Redmane Castle and straight to the Radahn festival. Lo and behold, you can meet Alexander here, and you can actually summon him into the Radahn fight to of course help you defeat him. It's not necessary to summon Alexander into the fight, but either way, if you choose to or not, you do need to defeat Radahn, and after doing so and watching the cutscene, you need to make sure that you speak to Alexander after the fight straight away. This is the pivotal moment that if you do not speak to Alexander here, you will fail the quest. He is just slightly south of the Sight of Grace that appears at the top of the hill, and you can see him sort of like collecting the various bodies that Radahn has left behind. And like I say, make sure that you exhaust his dialogue here, because if you do not exhaust his dialogue, he will not move to the next spot. But granted that you have spoken to him and exhausted all of his dialogue, he will then move to his next location, which is in the massive lava lake right next to Fort Lade in Mount Gelmir. Again, you can get here by wrapping round the Seethe Water River, and there is actually going to be another magma worm boss that you need to kill that will pop out of the lava when you get here for the first time. And once you've defeated that magma worm, you should hopefully be able to hear Alexander grunting in the background, and if you use Torrent to run up to this specific ledge, you will be able to see Alexander using the lava as some sort of like training to try and get tougher, and you can speak to him whilst you're standing on this particular rock formation. Again, make sure that you exhaust all of his dialogue. He will in fact actually give you a jar helmet for being such a valiant warrior, and after you exhaust all of his dialogue, he will then move to his final location, which is actually in Farum Azula. And you do need to beat the Godskin duo boss that is in Farum Azula to go from the Dragon Temple Altar Site of Grace, and instead of going across the crumbling area to then head towards Malekith's boss fight, you actually need to go up the staircase and use 2 keystone swords to activate the fog wall to give you access to this particular lift. And then once you use that lift to go to the Dragon Temple lift Site of Grace, you can then wrap round to this specific floating area where you will find Alexander gazing out into the distance. Again, speak to him here. He will want you to fight him in an ultimate battle to decide the ultimate warrior, and upon defeating him, he will give you his last victory speech before then exploding and giving you the Shard of Alexander. And then basically with that, that is Alexander's quest complete. And going from one simple quest to another, the next quest I'm going to show you on how to complete is actually going to be Box Questline. Box Questline is one that you can start pretty much instantly, as all we need to do is find him, and he's unfortunately been transformed into a random tree which is located just here in Limgrave. You've probably naturally found him just by running past this area in your game, because as soon as you get close enough you can hear him shouting out for help, and by either rolling into or hitting this particular tree you will then reveal Bok and you can speak to him for the first time. He'll first of all be a bit confused as to why you're trying to hit him, but then remember that he obviously got put into that spell where he then looked like a tree, and will continue to tell you that he's actually been cast out of a certain cave by his fellow demi-humans. He also mentions that he wants to be a seamster like his mother, but these demi-humans have got hold of his sewing needle and he's a bit afraid to go and take them on himself to go and get it back. So we of course need to help Bok and go and get this needle for him, and we can do so by going to the coastal cave that's located just south of the First Steps Site of Grace in Limgrave. You will need to take down 2 demi-humans, and upon doing so, like I say, you will then be given the needle. Bok will actually be residing at the beginning of this coastal cave, and once you've got the needle back, you will be able to give him that, and he will thank you kindly for obviously giving it back to him. Now at this point onwards, Bok is basically going to be following you in the background as you progress through your game. So there's going to be one of 4 spots where you could potentially see him. One place where you're potentially going to see Bok is going to be the lake facing cliffs Site of Grace, but he can also appear at the East Raya Lucaria Gate Site of Grace, as well as the Outers Highway Junction Site of Grace, or lastly the East Capital Rampant Site of Grace. Essentially, whichever one you go to first after doing those first initial steps will be the first location where he will appear, and after speaking to him in one of these various locations, the next step in the quest is to actually go to the Church of Vows to go and pick up the golden needle. This golden needle will allow any seamster who uses this to alter demigod armor and clothing. So where Bok wants to become the greatest seamster of all, we of course need to go pick that up so he can alter all kinds of armor. But there's also one more thing that we need to do before we can go to Bok, and that's actually obtain a demigod piece of armor. Of course, there's only a select few amount of demigods in the game, again only a few of which can actually have their armors purchased, but the easiest piece of demigod armor to obtain is actually going to be Radahn's armor. So at this point I highly recommend that you go to Redmane Castle and attend the festival and defeat Radahn to then go and purchase his main armor, and then once you've got the golden needle and his armor set, you will then be able to go to Bok in one of the 4 various locations. Again, he will move on further if you progress further in the game, and then you can speak to Bok and exhaust all of his dialogue and make him proud of the fact that he's now able to alter demigod armor. Now, from this point onwards in Bok's quest will depend on how you've played your game so far. In the gameplay that you're seeing in the background, I have already become the Lord of Frenzied Flame, or at least touched the 3 fingers to be infected with the Frenzied Flame, so I do not have the ability to talk to Malenia. But in your game, if you do have the ability to talk to Malenia at Sites of Graces, you will be able to sit down at any of those 4 Sites of Graces that I pointed out earlier, to which she will tell you that she can hear Bok crying and he seems unhappy with his appearance. So if that is the case and you can speak to Malenia, then you do need to do that. to progress with Box's quest, but if you are the Lord of Frenzied Flame like I was in this game, that step gets skipped, and for whatever reason I also couldn't give Bok a larval tear, because again, one of the two options that you can do to help Bok to get over the fact that he doesn't think that he's good enough is to either give him a larval tear so that he can turn into a human, or go and pick up the prattling pate You're Beautiful to tell Bok that he is fine just the way he is and therefore does not need to change into a human. I unfortunately don't have the footage for this, but if you give Bok a larval tear, he will turn into a human but ultimately pass away because he will not have Rennala's Great Rune, meaning that he won't survive the transition. So I highly recommend that you go and get the You're Beautiful prattling pate, and that can be found in the Hermit Village in the Mount Gelmir area, again the location of which is going to be right here. And then all you need to do is use the pate in front of him and exhaust his dialogue, and he will thank you very much for your kind words. And then once you have done that, that has essentially completed Bok's questline, and you will now have access to an NPC that can alter your armor for free whenever you want, which I know probably isn't the best reward in the world, but it is still a neat little questline with a very cool reward. So if you wanted to test out what all the armors look like when they're altered, you can do so for free. And the next quest in this video that I want to show you guys is in fact going to be Millicent's questline. Millicent's questline actually gives a whole bunch of different talismans, all that are extremely useful, and this quest can be done at any point in time in your game. It doesn't interfere with any other questline, and even if you've completed the game in its fullest and beaten the Elden Beast, you can still go back and do Millicent's quest. So to start it off, we of course need to find Millicent first of all, and she is going to be residing in the Church of Plague, and she's going to be in quite some distress. That's because, as the church is fittingly named, she is plagued with scarlet rot and we need to find a cure for her. So if we head down into Sellia, the town of sorcery, and more specifically to Gowry's shack, we can actually speak to Gowry, to which he will tell us that we need to get a particular needle, and that particular needle is in the possession of Commander O'Neill, which is the boss fight in the heart of the Aeonia Lake, just next to the town of Sellia. So again, defeat Commander O'Neill, obtain the damaged needle, and bring that back to Gowry so that he can fix that needle so that we can take it up to Millicent. Here, after speaking to Gowry and giving him the needle, you will need to refresh your game, so whether that's teleporting back to a site of grace and resting at it, or just simply save and quitting out of your game and reloading it, you will need to refresh your game because that will prompt Gowry to fix the needle and give that back to you so you can go and give it to Millicent. So once you refresh your game and got to the fixed needle, like I say, go back to Millicent, convince her to use the needle on herself, to which she will do so at the cost of one of her arms. But ultimately she thanks us because we did save her at the end of the day, although she does now not have an arm, and after you exhaust her dialogue in this church, she will advise that she now needs to go about her quest. But just before she does so, again, make sure that you rest at a site of grace, because she will then go to Gowry's shack, to which Gowry has also gone elsewhere. Speak to Millicent at Gowry's shack because you need to speak to her here to trigger her to go to her next place, which is going to be just outside of the Erdtree Gazing Hill site of grace. Again, you'll be able to see Millicent here, and after speaking to her and exhausting her dialogue in this location, she will inform you that she cannot help you in battle as much as she wishes she could do, because obviously she is missing her arm, so we need to go and find her a replacement. Luckily for us, just up the canyon is actually going to be the Shaded Castle, and inside the Shaded Castle there's going to be a little sort of like area at the back left of the castle that is being guarded by one of the knights, and inside that room is going to be a chest where you can pick up the Valkyrie prosthesis. This of course is a prosthetic arm, and we can take that back to Millicent, and once we've provided her with that prosthetic arm, she will then make her way to the Windmill Village, and she can actually be used as a summon to help you beat the Noble Skin boss at the top of the Windmill Village area. It is not necessary for you to summon her, but essentially once you defeat the Noble Skin boss, you will be able to then rest at the site of grace at the top of Windmill Heights, and upon doing so, Millicent will appear, and again, you just simply need to exhaust her dialogue. And once again, once you've done that, she will then move on to another area, this this time moving to the mountain tops of the Giants, more specifically the ancient Snow Valley ruined site of grace. Again, she is just going to be standing here, and once you exhaust all of her dialogue, she will now move to one of her final locations, being the prayer room in the Halig Tree area. So yes, of course, throughout all of this, you are going to have to be progressing through your game, and you do need the secret medallion to obviously get to the consecrated snowfields and then eventually the Halig Tree area. And if you don't know how to get the secret medallion, there are two pieces that you need to collect, one of which is from an old Albinuric named Albus, which is in the village of the Albinurics, located in the southwest of the Lake of Lernia, and then the second piece is actually located at the top of Castle Sol, and you need to beat the Commander Nile boss to then progress up the elevator and collect that second half of the medallion. And then once you do so, you can then go to the Grand Lift of the Road and use the secret medallion there to, like I say, access the consecrated snowfields, do the trial in Ordina to light the 4 lights after using the Everjail, to then access the teleporter that will take you to the Halig Tree. And again, work your way all the way through to the prayer room, and Millicent will be there, to which you can exhaust her dialogue once more and trigger the final step in her quest. Now for this final step, the best way to get there is to get the Drainage Channel Site of Grace and then head back on yourself to go to the Scarlet Rot Lake that you've just traversed through to get to this Site of Grace. But instead of going through that lake, head up this little cliff, to which you can then use the branch to go to this secret Scarlet Rot Lake. But the caveat with this secret lake is it's got a spirit tree inside of it, and yes, you do need to defeat this spirit tree, so I highly recommend bringing something that is incredibly strong to use, or something that's incredibly cheesy like Morgwyn's Spear, the Blasphemous Blade, or even the Darkmoon Greatsword. And then once you've done so, on the edge of this lake, on the sort of like ridged hill part to the right, there will now be 2 summon signs. One to help Millicent and one to take on Millicent. Depending on which option you choose, you will get one of the following talismans. If you choose to help Millicent and defeat the 4 sisters that are trying to take her down, you will then be granted with the Rotten Winged Insignia as your reward for doing so. But if you decide to go against Millicent and defeat her, you will then get the Millicent's prosthesis as your reward, but unfortunately you cannot get both of them at the same time. If we were to travel back in time and play an earlier release of the game, you could actually in fact help Millicent to get the Rotten Wing Insignia and then defeat her afterwards to then get her to drop Millicent's prosthesis, but this is not possible anymore. So unfortunately, if you want both rewards, you do have to go into a New Game Plus to get both talismans now. But either way, whether you choose to help or go against Millicent, the quest isn't quite finished just yet, because you will be able to get the needle back, which you can then use after beating Melania, the secret boss in the Halig Tree area, on the Bloom at the end of her boss fight and get yourself a somber smithing ancient stone. But then we can also take a trip back to Gowry, exhaust his dialogue and defeat him to get ourselves the Phlox Canvas Talisman as well. So like I say, once you've done Millicent's quest and either helped her or defeated her, use the needle on Melania's Bloom after you defeat Melania in your game, and go back to Gowry to make sure that you exhaust the dialogue, defeat him as well, and get all of the relevant rewards from this particular quest line. And like I say, once you've done all of that, that is Millicent's quest done and dusted. But of course, it's time to move on to the next quest in this list, and now we are going to go over Dung Eater's quest. Now again, Dung Eater's quest does not affect any other quest line in the game, but one of the items that you need for the quest does disappear if you turn the capital of Leyndell into the capital of Ash. So if you want to complete Dung Eater's quest line, I highly recommend that you do that before completing Farum Azula. But other than that, his questline is actually relatively simple and has very little amount of steps, because all you need to do to get Dung Eater to spawn in is once again go to the Altus Plateau and use one of the sites of graces there. So again, get your hands on the Dectus Medallion, or go through the precipice and beat the Magma Worm Makar to gain access to Altus Plateau that way. Use one of the sites of grace in Altus Plateau and head back to the round table. You will then see that the door past the twin maiden husks has opened up, and there is a red phantom sitting on the floor. That red phantom is of course Dung Eater himself. After speaking to Dung Eater, he'll actually have no interest in speaking to you at all because you do not have what is called the Seabed Curse afflicted on you. So after making sure that you've exhausted all of his dialogue in the Round Table Hold, we now need to go and find our first Seabed Curse. Now I am just going to show you the 5 locations of these Seabed Curses because I do recommend that you actually get these first of all because you're going to need them anyway for later on. And one Seabed Curse is actually one that you can miss if you do turn the capital into the capital of Ash. That is because this particular Seabed Curse is located just past the east capital rampart, and you need to follow the path past the envoys down into this particular building that is being guarded by the gargoyle. And once you go into that building, you can take the elevator down to then go to the adjacent building where there's a ladder you can take up to find this body up the stairs that has the first Seabed Curse. And then the second one is actually very close by, as it's in the physical form of the Round Table Hold, which is the middle building in Lionel Capital. I believe you can still access this area if you do turn the capital into the capital of Ash, but either way you need to make your way into the building and go into the same room where Dung Eater is located in the Round Table Hold, but obviously go there in this version of the building, and again you'll be able to find the second Seabed Curse. Again, the exact map location is going to be on screen for you here, but of course we've got 3 more, and one of which is actually hidden away deep in Volcano Manor. That's because for this one we need to make our way to the Temple of Eagle, so we need to beat the Godskin boss that is residing in this temple, and then head up to the walkway where the different man serpent enemies are residing, and head as if we're going to the teleporter that takes you to the Rykard boss fight. But instead of going to that teleporter, if we do a bit of a U-turn up the staircase, we will see that there is a fog wall door that you need 2 stone sword keys for. You need to open up this door and do the jumping puzzle to reach the very bottom, because at the bottom, around all of the first generation Albinurics, is going to be the 3rd body with the Seabed Curse on it. So again, this one might take a little bit of time, and of course you need the stone sword keys to access it, but once you've done so, the last 2 Seabed Curses are actually residing in the Halig Tree area. And then once you do make your way to Elful, and more specifically to the Prayer Room Site of Grace, there are going to be 2 more Seabed Curses that are very, very close to the Site of Grace, and the first one of which is just a little bit down the path, and if you jump onto sort of like this ledge, you can then wrap around the open garden and head up the tree branch, which will take you up to the elevated platform, and the body with the Seabed Curse is just out in the open, and you can of course pick up the item nice and easily. And again, for the last Seabed Curse, if you go back to the Prayer Room Site of Grace, you can follow essentially that same path, but instead of jumping up to the garden area on that same sort of like ledge, you can then jump down onto a lower platform, and that will lead you down a bunch of stairs into a very dark room. In that room, behind a bunch of objects, is going to be the last Seabed Curse, and again of course I'm going to be showing you the routes for both of them, so feel free to pause, watch where I go for the relevant Seabed Curse, and just basically follow the path I show you on screen. But once you've got all 5, we then need to go back to Dung Eater in the Round Table Hold, and he will change his mind about us and give us a little bit more information and explain that his physical body is being gelled away in the subterranean shunning grounds. And again, for those of you that don't know how to get here, if you still have the capital of Lionel in its normal form, all you simply need to do is go from the Avenue Balcony Site of Grace, go down the stairs and hang left and jump over the railing to then drop down where the Silver Scarab is located, and if you hang right, you will be able to drop down into a well. That well will lead you into the subterranean shunning grounds, and more specifically to the underground roadside Site of Grace. And for those of you that have turned the capital into the capital of Ash, you can still get there just by using the open grate that's near the Site of Grace for the capital of Ash and dropping down once again into the subterranean shunning grounds. Essentially, from the underground roadside Site of Grace, if you come out of the room and turn left, you'll be able to go forward and drop down into another sort of pipework area. And again, if you turn left from jumping down, you'll be able to follow that route and go up a ladder to which you'll be able to see Dung Eater trapped in the jail. Dung Eater did give us a key as long as you have exhausted his dialogue in the round table hold, and we can use that key to unlock the jail and set Dung Eater free. He will then appear at this particular lake just outside of the capital. So all you simply need to do is head over to that lake and Dung Eater will invade your world, to which you need to defeat him, and after doing so you'll be granted with the Sword of Milos. And after you've obtained a weapon and defeated Dung Eater, you then need to take a trip back to the round table hold and exhaust his dialogue once again whilst he sat there, but then you need to return to the jail where you let him free from, because the body is going to be trapped in a chair in that jail cell, to which you can use those seabed curses on that body, and after the cutscene plays you will then be granted with the mending rune of the Fell Curse, which is yet another optional ending that you can use after defeating the Elden Beast. And then once you've done that, I recommend that you refresh your game by saving and quitting and reloading from where you were, and reloading the game inside of this jail, because when you do so you will also be able to pick up Dung Eater's armor. And then once you've collected the armor and the mending rune, you have successfully completed Dung Eater's quest. And the quest line that we've got coming up next is going to be Thops' questline. Now this one again is super simple, and it does not affect any other questlines and can be done at any point. Thops is a mage that can be found in the Church of Erith, which is just next to the lake facing cliffs Site of Grace, and once you meet him there for the first time you'll find that he's a little bit down on himself and is trying to become a master sorcerer. In fact, one of the first interactions with him is to donate a couple of runes, and after you've done so you can then exhaust his dialogue, to which he tells you he wants to gain access to Raya Lucaria Academy. Of course, for us to obtain access to Raya Lucaria Academy, we can pick up the key which is being guarded by the Glintstone Dragon, which will obviously allow us to go through the various gates to gain access to the academy. If we bring this key to Thops, he will not accept it because he wants us to have access before he does. So we need to go and get a second key. This key is actually on a body that is hanging from the chandeliers in the first room in the Church of the Cuckoo, but it is a bit of a long way round that we need to get to it, because we do need to defeat the Red Wolf boss and have access to the Debate Parlor Site of Grace. That is because from this Site of Grace we can walk out into the courtyard and hang left to go up to the stairs where the two mages are obviously sniping us with the glintstone spells. Once we go up those stairs, we can then turn left to jump over the barrier and land on the stairs down below, to once again wrap round to the left and jump over the next barrier to land on the roofs. From this point onwards, it's a fairly linear path, but we need to use the ladder to then go up, to then run past yet another glintstone mage, to then drop down onto the next roofs and come to this building with the open windows. This building is once again the first building that we open the door to, with the chandeliers with the body on top, and once you jump through the window you will be on some wooden banisters, and from here it should be plain to see the key, or at least the item, on top of the chandeliers. So what you need to do is drop down, grab that second key, and then bring that to Thops back in the Church of Erith. He will thank you ever so kindly for bringing him his own Raya Lucaria Academy key, and as a reward he will also give you the erudition gesture. This is important, and we'll come back to why it's important in a moment. But again, make sure you exhaust all of his dialogue at this point in time, because he will tell you that he's going to go back into Raya Lucaria Academy and obviously continue on with his works. If we follow him in, and more specifically go to the schoolhouse classroom Site of Grace, we can then go back outside and wrap around the corner to find that unfortunately he has passed away. Don't ask me how or why this has happened at his desk, but Thops is unfortunately someone who doesn't quite make it in Elden Ring, and after collecting his items along with his bell bearing, that essentially ends Thops' quest. And I know it's very short and very sad, but like I mentioned earlier, he also gave us the erudition gesture, and that is actually very important, because if we pick up one of the glintstone masks that are hidden around Raya Lucaria Academy, once we put one of those masks on and use the erudition gesture, you will see that the glintstone helmet puppet lights up in the final stage of using the gesture, and this is actually a key to open up 2 cells in 2 different towers. Those being the converted tower, which is just southwest of the Lake of Lernia, as if you're going up to the Erdtree Avatar boss, but also the converted fringe tower, which is to the northeast of the lake, as if you're heading up to the Madness village. And like I say, if you use that gesture with the glintstone helmet equipped, you will be able to unlock those seals that are blocking off those entrances, and in the converted fringe tower you'll be able to pick up the Cannon of Hamer and the Gavel of Hamer, but then in the converted tower, which is in the southwest, you will be able to get yet another memory stone. Of course, these can be useful, especially if you're running a mage build, but once you've got both of those items, that truly does fully complete Thops' quest. And again, I'm going to pair 2 mage sort of quests together because the next quest we're going to talk about is going to be Seluvis' questline. And like I mentioned at the beginning of Ranni's quest, Seluvis' questline does get directly impact and also directly impacts itself other quests in the game. Essentially, if you go far enough into Ranni's quest that you get the Finger Slayer blade and give that to Ranni, you will fail Seluvis' quest and it cannot be completed from that point onwards. But of course, to start Seluvis' quest in the first place, we do actually need to start Ranni's quest and speak to Ranni in Ranni's Rise. That is because when you do so for the first time and join her faction, you will then be able to speak to the phantom version of Seluvis, to which he prompts you to meet him in his tower. So once you've done that and spoken to the phantom and then meet Seluvis in person, he will then give you his potion. He is targeting this potion to be used specifically on a character called Nepheli, but there are 3 different ways that you can use this potion, one of which of course is actually using it on Nepheli as Seluvis intends, but you can also talk to Gideon in the Round Table Hold and advise him of Seluvis' plan, to which he will dispose of the potion, or you can use the potion on Dung Eater. Just to explain those 3 options, if you use the potion on either Nepheli or Dung Eater, they will become puppets and will be available to buy as summons through Seluvis' shop, but of course if you give the potion to Gideon for him to dispose of it, none of them will become puppets and therefore you cannot get their summons. And again, just to be abundantly clear, if you do use the potion on either Nepheli or Dung Eater, that will lock you out of their respective quest lines. So if you want to experience all of the quest lines, then I highly recommend that you give the potion to Gideon, but if you want either Nepheli or Dung Eater as a puppet to use as a summon in your game, then obviously feel free to use a potion on either one of those 2, just obviously bear in mind it's going to lock you out of their respective quest lines. But once you've used the potion in one of those 3 ways, you can go back to Seluvis and tell him that you've used the potion on Nepheli, and after he thanks you for doing so, we now need to find his secret lair, which is just outside of his tower in those ruins in between his tower and Ranni's Rise. Once you've found the illusionary wall which reveals the staircase, you can then go down into his lair, but at this point you need to make sure that you interact with this specific message which is in the back right corner of this lair. Once you make sure that you have interacted with this message, you can then go straight back to Seluvis and ask him about this secret lair. He will then introduce you to puppets and actually give you one for free, but to progress with his questline you need to purchase another one, and in order to purchase puppets you need starlight shards. There are various starlight shards that you can pick up throughout the game. They all tend to be around these particular structures, but can also be given by certain NPCs or bought by certain merchants, but I do advise that you find one naturally around these kind of altars that you can pick up from the ground. That is because if the game doesn't recognize that you have found and picked up a starlight shard, it may not progress with Seluvis' quest. So if you're having any difficulty at this particular point in time with the quest, double make sure that you interacted with that message in his secret lair, and also make sure that you picked up a new starlight shard, especially if you're in a new game plus. Although you've probably got 100 starlight shards in your inventory, if you haven't picked up a brand new one in this current playthrough, it won't register it and therefore won't progress the story. So like I say, just make sure you pick up a brand new starlight shard and interact with that message, and then from there you can purchase yet another puppet, and when you do so, Seluvis will now talk to you about a secret scheme. This scheme is to control demigods and people like Ranni so that Seluvis can obviously rule the entire lands. But in order to do so, he needs a certain Starlight Shard, being an Amber Starlight Shard, and asks us to go and collect this shard. Luckily for us, it is very easy to obtain, because if you go to the Outer's Highway site of Grace, you should be able to see on your map this little crater just to the north of it, and inside that crater is going to be an Amber Starlight Shard. So going from the site of Grace, if you just wrap around that hill round to the right, you will come to this sort of opening where you can go through it and pick up that Amber Starlight Shard. And then once you do so, we can return to Seluvis, bring him that Starlight Shard, and he will thank us very kindly and give us the magic Scorpion Charm. Now at this point, I do render this as completing Seluvis's questline. There is actually no need to go any further with Seluvis's questline, because as I say, with that Starlight Shard, he makes a special potion to which we need to use on Ranni. But if we go up to Ranni with the potion, she is smarter than she looks and understands what's going on here, and therefore wants nothing to do with us and prevents us from using that potion and destroys it. Also, in the meantime, she knows that Seluvis is behind this plan and actually gets Seluvis killed, which in turn means that you've completed Seluvis's questline, but you've also locked yourself out of Ranni's questline. Of course, this can be fixed by using a Celestial Dew in the Church of Vows, but to avoid all of that aggravation, once you get the Scorpion Charm, I would not talk to Seluvis anymore. Simply obtain the Scorpion Charm and leave him to it so that you can carry on with Ranni's quest. But again, if you're not too fussed about Ranni's questline, feel free to speak to her afterwards and fully complete the quest. But either way, like I say, once you got the magic Scorpion Charm, that is pretty much the end of Seluvis's quest. And the next quest that we're going to be diving into is going to be Hyetta's questline. Again, this particular quest does not affect any other questlines in the game, but it does unlock the Madness ending, and this quest can be done at any point in your game. So in order to get things started, we do actually need to take a trip down to South Limgrave, because just past the Bridge of Sacrifice we can find Hyetta in her first form, which is Irina, who is sitting by this wall. After speaking to her, she asks us to deliver a letter to her father, who is the ruler of Castle Morn, and after delivering the letter to her father in Castle Morn, we can return back to Irina to find that she's dead. But don't worry, this is supposed to happen, because after this event takes place, if we go to the lake facing cliffs site of Grace, we will find that Hyetta is standing right there. And now from this point onwards, we need to give Hyetta 4 different Shibiri grapes. They are going to be pretty much right next to the locations where she is, so if you just simply turn around from the lake facing cliffs site of Grace and head back towards the Godric fight, you will see a purple item on the floor on the body, and that is going to be the first grape that you can collect. So once you've picked that up, bring that to Hyetta and she will actually eat that grape and thank you kindly for your service. And then, like I say, essentially we need to rinse and repeat this same process for 3 more grapes throughout the Lake of Lernia. And then the second location where you can find Hyetta is now going to be the Purified Ruins, which is literally just north of the lake facing cliff site of Grace. And again, if you speak to her here, she's looking for some more Shibiri grapes, and a second one can actually be found inside of the Purified Ruins. You do need to break the sort of like wooden objects that are in the way of the staircase, but once you have access to that staircase, you can go into the ruins, grab that second Shibiri grape and bring that to Hyetta so she can eat that as well. And once she's fully eaten that grape, she will then move on to her third location, which again is directly north, being the Gate Town Bridge site of Grace. Now, after speaking to her here, again we're going to need to find a third Shibiri grape, but this one is a little bit a ways away. In fact, it's on the literal opposite side of the lake, because if you head directly west, you will come across the Ravenger's shack, and once you get here for the first time, you'll actually be invaded by Hyetta's father, or Irina's father I should say. So we need to defeat him, and once we do so, he will drop the third grape that we need to then bring to Hyetta. So once again, once we speak to Hyetta, she will indeed eat this grape. However, she's cottoned onto something and realizes that maybe these aren't quite the same grapes that you can get elsewhere. In fact, by exhausting all of her dialogue, we can tell her that these are in fact eyes and not grapes. Again, this will cause a specific event to play where she actually throws up, so once that happens and we hear her doing that, we actually need to rest at the Gatetown Bridge site of grace to refresh the game and speak to her once more in this same location. This is pivotal because if you don't do this and you don't speak to her again after resting at a site of grace, she will not move on to her final locations. So if you are here at the Gatetown Bridge and you're having difficulty for whatever reason, make sure that you just exhaust all of her dialogue, rest at the site of grace again, and then exhaust her dialogue once more, because then once you've done that all successfully, she will then move on to her fourth location, which is going to be Bellum Church, which again is somewhat directly north from her previous locations. And once again, she's asking for one more Shibiri grape, and for this specific one, we need to head up to the Church of Inhibition, so through the Frenzied Flame village, and defeat yet another invader, this time being Vike. So again, just to be clear, as soon as you make it up to the Church of Inhibition, you will be invaded by Vike, and again, once defeating him, you will get yourself another Shibiri grape, and then once you've obtained that, head back to Hyetta and give her her final grape, to which you will be ever so thankful for your service, and we'll move on to the final location. Now, for this final location, we do actually need to go to the subterranean shunning grounds, and for those of you that don't know, you can access that through Leyndell Capital. If you have Leyndell Capital in its original state, so you haven't turned it into the capital of Ash, you can simply go to the Avenue Balcony site of grace, go down the stairs and hang left and jump over this little railing and banister to land on the roofs, and then jump down where the silver scarab is located. But again, if you hang a right, you will find a well, which again you can jump down, and following the path down that well will lead you to the subterranean shunning grounds. But if you have turned your capital into the capital of Ash, you can just simply use the middle grate, which will be near the site of grace, and simply drop down into the subterranean shunning grounds from there, because the next step in this quest is to defeat Mohg in the Forsaken Depths, so that we can access the secret path to the Three Fingers lair. So all you simply need to do is go through the subterranean shunning fields and the various pipes, and you will eventually come to this elevator that will drop you down to the Forsaken Depths and that Mohg boss fight. And after you've defeated Mohg in this Forsaken Chapel behind the chest in that boss fight arena, you can actually roll or hit the pedestal behind it, and that will reveal a secret tunnel. This secret tunnel, like I say, will lead to the Three Fingers lair, but it does require a little bit of a jumping puzzle, so do be careful, as if you fall down you will obviously meet your death. But you can use the sticking out coffins as obviously pedestals to jump down nice and safely, and once you get far enough down, you can then jump into the middle where that floor will collapse and you will fall down into this last location. Here you will see Hyetta obviously waiting for you, and she advises you to go through the door at the back and meet the Three Fingers to become the Frenzied Lord. In order to do so and interact with the door correctly, you actually need to remove all of your clothing, so if you are wearing any armor, take that all off, and then you can interact with the door and meet the Three Fingers. And then once you've become the Lord of Frenzied Flame, you can speak to Hyetta once more, exhaust all of her dialogue, to which she will ask you to touch her eyes, and after doing so, she will eventually burn to the Frenzied Flame, and as a reward, you will get the Frenzied Flame seal. Essentially, if you are going for the Frenzied Flame ending, this is where this questline would end, because you would go on and beat the game by defeating the Elden Beast and use the Frenzied Flame ending on the statue of Marika. But if you wanted to do this quest, but say maybe use a different ending, you can actually revert the Frenzied Flame, and in order to do so, you need to complete Millicent's questline and use the Unalloyed Needle in the Placidusax boss fight arena. You don't have to beat Placidusax, but as long as you use it in his boss arena, you can then remove the Frenzied Flame from your body and then have access to all of the other endings in the game. But of course, you can choose if you do or don't want to do that, and as I say, the main reason for doing this quest is to get your hands on the Frenzied Flame seal, because that does boost obviously Frenzied Flame incantations, and of course gives you an alternative ending if you haven't done done that already. But as I say, that is pretty much everything that you need to know to complete Hyetta's questline. So now let's move on to the next quest in this video. And the next quest that we're going to be talking about is in fact going to be Varre's questline. Varre is the first NPC that you'll probably ever meet in the game, as he is there waiting for you at the first step site of grace. But as much as he's the first NPC that you'll come across, his quest can actually be done at any time, and it does not affect any other quest lines. So like I say, you can find him pretty much immediately in your game, but to actually make him progress to the next step, we do need to progress the game a little bit. Essentially, the trigger for Varre moving on to the next step of his quest is when we actually speak to the finger maiden that is inside the round table hold. But of course, if you go to the round table hold for the very first time, you will find that that door is closed, and in order to open it, we actually need to defeat a remembrance boss, and I highly recommend that you defeat Godric, as that is going to be the easiest remembrance boss to defeat. So in your games, make sure that you've defeated at least one remembrance boss, and then head back to the round table hold, to which you can then speak to the finger maiden. After doing so, if you head back to the first steps site of grace, you will notice that Varre has disappeared, but he's left a message behind, and once interacting with it, he will tell you that he has gone to the Lake of Lernia. But more specifically, he is going to be waiting for us outside of this particular church on the west side of the Lernia of the Lakes. So we can venture over there, find Varre outside of the church, and speak to him once again, to which he will ask us about our first impressions of the finger maidens and the round table hold, to which you can reply something's not right, and then Varre will start his quest of inducting you into the Bloody Finger faction. And for the first task, as part of your induction, you are given a few furled fingers, to which you are supposed to invade 3 different people and then return to Varre to continue on with the quest. However, as per the 1.06 update, you do not have to go online and invade anybody anymore, because you can simply come to the Rifeblood ruins in Altus Plateau, to which you will be able to find an NPC invasion sign in the leftmost structure that has about 3 or 4 dogs guarding it. This NPC is going to be Magnus the Beastclaw, and all you simply need to do is obviously invade his world, defeat Magnus, and then return to Varre, which will also complete this same step. So yes, you can do one of 2 things: use those felled fingers to invade 3 different people's games. Again, you don't actually have to be successful and defeat the host, you just simply need to invade 3 different people. Or if you don't want to use the online services, you can of course just go to the Rifeblood ruins and beat the NPC instead. But either way, once you've done one of those 2 things, you will then be given your second task, which you need to soak a white cloth in the blood of a maiden. Now, there are a few maidens that you can actually use this cloth on throughout the game, but the one that I highly recommend that you use it on is going to be the one in the Church of Inhibition, just simply because it's one of the easiest maidens to find and is not too far from Varre's location at the Rose Church. So we can simply go to the Church of Inhibition. If you haven't defeated Vike yet, who is actually an invasion that occurs when you first go to the Church of Inhibition, of course beat Vike, but when you go into the church itself, there will be a maiden sat on a chair, and again you can interact with that maiden and soak the cloth in that blood. And then again, once you've done that, we can return to Varre and he will congratulate us and complete our anointment as a bloody finger by giving us a reusable bloody finger. After he does this, make sure that you speak to Varre again, because when you do so and exhaust his dialogue for the second time, he will actually grant you the Pure Blood Knight's Medal, which is a medal that is used to teleport to the Mohgwyn Palace. Mohgwyn's Palace is of course where Mohg, the Lord of Blood, is located, and is possibly going to be the area that we use to access the DLC, so if anybody is looking on how to get here, this is one of the ways that you can actually get to this particular area. But as far as Varre's questline goes, we do need to work our way up the mausoleum, and more specifically to the midpoint site of grace. That is because just next to that site of grace, as if we're going back into the dark area of the mausoleum, you will be able to find Varre's red summon sign, to which we can obviously invade his world. Make sure that you are a fairly decent level, because Varre is a fairly high level character, and he also has the Swarm of Flies incantation, which can cause a large amount of bleed buildup. So like I say, just be careful with this fight because he can catch you off guard and obviously hit you with those bleed procs, but after defeating him, you will of course return to your own world, and if you go back where the red summon sign was, Varre will be there, obviously in a bit more of a sorry state, and after exhausting all of his dialogue, he will pass away and leave behind his bouquet, which is a very good bleed build-up weapon, but it's not the best bleed weapon in the world. But of course, on top of that, you also now have access to the Mohg fight, which we'll need for the DLC, and if you actually come to this specific location, there are going to be about 15 different albinurics which you can farm for a load of runes, and is probably the best rune farmer in the entire game. So not only do you get Varre's bouquet and a reusable bloody finger during this quest, but you also have access to Mohg and the best rune farm in the game. So I do highly recommend completing this quest as soon as you physically can, because if you're struggling for runes or struggling for levels, you can of course just use that rune farm. But with all that said, that is the end of Varre's quest once you defeat him, so now it's time to move on to another quest line. And next up in this list, we are actually going to go through Nepheli's quest line. Now Nepheli's quest is actually missable if you go too far into your game, and I do advise that you complete the majority of the steps before you get to the mountain tops of the giant, as all of the steps can be done before that point, and that way it saves you from potentially missing out on the rewards. But of course, with that said, if you're looking to start the quest, you do need to find Nepheli for the first time, and she is located in the Stormvale Castle, more specifically in between the lift side chamber site of grace and the secluded cell site of grace. And on the right hand side, there's going to be a little room where Nepheli is located, speaking to one of the fallen knights, and as long as you exhaust all of her dialogue here, she will then actually become available to help you with the Godric boss fight. Again, it's not necessary to summon her in, but you do need to go and defeat Godric, and once you do that, either with or without the help of Nepheli, make sure that you light the Site of Grace at the end of the boss fight and actually use it to rest at this Site of Grace, and then you can head to the Round Table Hold where Nepheli will be waiting for you. Also, just as a side note, if for whatever reason you've done all of these steps so far and Nepheli is still not at the Round Table Hold, make sure that you exhaust Gideon's dialogue as well, and then after doing so, rest at the Round Table Site of Grace, and Nepheli should appear at the round table. Speak to her, exhaust all of her dialogue, and she will also give you the Arsenal Charm Talisman. After receiving that talisman, Nepheli will then move on to the village of Albinurics, to which again you can exhaust her dialogue here. She will be waiting underneath the bridge as if you're heading up to the Site of Grace for the village of the Albinurics, and once you exhaust her dialogue, she will again become available to be summoned in for the Omen Killer fight. Again, it's optional as to whether you summon her in or not, but you do need to defeat the Omen Killer, and again, upon successfully defeating this boss, Nepheli will return to the Round Table Hold, but this time she will be down the stairs past Master Hugh, who is the blacksmith in the Round Table Hold, where she will be in a bit of despair, and again we need to exhaust her dialogue, and after we've exhausted all of her dialogue, we now need to go back to Gideon and ask Gideon about Nepheli's despair. After exhausting both of their dialogues, the next thing we need to do is go and get the Stormhawk King Spirit Ash from the Chapel of Anticipation. And for those of you that don't know, the Chapel of Anticipation is the first place where you spawn when you first load up your game, and the way that we get back there is by using one of the teleporters at the 4 belfries, which is in the west of the Lake of Lernia. At the top of the belfry area there will be a chest with a spectral stonesword key, and this spectral stonesword key is used to open up one of the 3 teleporters. Of course, make sure that you use the teleporter of Anticipation, which is essentially the middle portal in the 4 belfries, and upon activating that portal of Anticipation, you will then be taken to the Chapel of Anticipation, to which you can defeat the boss here and head back to the original chapel and pick up the Stormhawk King's Ash from the area on the right, which is now opened up. We need to bring this Stormhawk Ash to Nepheli in the Round Table Hold, but we can't actually give it to her if we haven't completed Roderico's Roderica's quest to allow her to spirit tune. So at this point in your game, if you haven't spoken to Roderica and Master Hugh in the Round Table Hold to allow Roderica to tune your spirit ashes, then of course you need to do that. It is just a little bit of a back and forth conversation between Master Hugh and Roderica. Then obviously make sure that Roderica is available in your game to tune spirit ashes, and then Nepheli will be more than happy to accept this Stormhawk Ash. And then once we've done that, we've actually got one last NPC that we need to speak to, and that is going to be Kenneth Hyetta, who can be located just west of the Third Church of Marika, standing on top of the collapsed wall. And when we speak to him here, he is basically trying to find a new ruler of Limgrave. Kenneth Hyetta is also looking for some help to clear out Fort Hyetta because it has been taken over by other guards. So again, it's going to be a little bit back and forth, but once you've cleared Fort Hyetta for the first time, go back to Kenneth, speak to him, and then he'll go back to Fort Hyetta himself. So then you need to meet him again at Fort Hyetta, where he's actually going to be overrun by some demi-humans. And again, once we've cleared it out and reach Kenneth Hyetta at the top, we can exhaust his dialogue, to which he'll then move on to the final location. And then at this point in your game, you do actually need to progress far enough to the fact that you beat Morgott. So the second Morgott fight that happens in the capital of Leyndell, because Kenneth Hyetta is looking for a new ruler of Limgrave and is potentially looking at Nepheli as a candidate for that. We need to defeat the current ruler of everything in Limgrave, which is in fact Morgott. So progress through your game, like I say, defeat Morgott, and once you have done so, you can then head back to the Godric the Grafted Site of Grace, and once you teleport back here, make sure that you rest once more, and then Nepheli, Kenneth Hyetta, and also Gostock should appear in the throne room right in front of you. Again, speak to Nepheli here, and that will complete Nepheli's questline, giving you an ancient dragon smithing stone, and you can actually purchase a second one from Gostock in his shop for 20,000 runes. And again, just to be clear, if for whatever reason you get to this location and Nepheli, Gostock and Kenneth Hyetta aren't here, just make sure that you've exhausted all of their dialogues in their last respective locations, and of course make sure that you've defeated Morgott in the capital of Leyndell, but also just double make sure that you actually rest and interact with the Godric the Grafted Site of Grace. And then essentially once you've done all of those things, this happy trio should arrive in their final throne room, and like I say, that will then complete Nepheli's questline. And the next quest that we're going to go through is in fact going to be Corhyn's and the Gold Masks questline. Again, with this questline, it does not interfere with any other questlines, but it is missable. I highly suggest that you start doing the majority of the steps for this quest before you get to the mountain tops of the giants, because if you defeat the fire giants and go to Farum Azula, this quest will then become unavailable and Corhyn will leave your world. So obviously, in order to start this quest and get things going as quickly as possible, we of course need to meet Corhyn, and he actually is one of the first people in the Round Table Hold. So as soon as you have access to the Round Table Hold, Corhyn will be there. He is the prophet that is on like the left hand side of the table. Now, in order to actually progress with this quest line, we do in fact need to go to the Altus Plateau, and again, in order to do that, you can either get the two halves of the medallion in Fort Hyetta and Fort Feroth respectively, or you can go through the Strewn Precipice and beat the Magma Worm boss Makar. Either way, no matter how you get to Altus Plateau, as soon as you get there and use one of the Sites of Grace, you can then head back to the Round Table Hold, to which Corhyn will inform you he is going to start his quest to become a member of the Golden Order. Again, exhaust all of Corhyn's dialogue at this point, to which he will move to the Altus Plateau, more specifically right next to the location where you actually pick up the map for the Altus Plateau, just north of the Altus Highway Junction Site of Grace. Again, speak to him here and he will tell you about a prophet known as Goldmask, and he is seeking out his location. Luckily for us, if we continue going up to this path, we will come to a broken bridge with a portal in the middle, and when we use that portal, we will then get teleported to the other side of the Altus Plateau, and if we simply turn around and look behind us, we will be able to see Goldmask pointing off towards the Erdtree in the distance. Goldmask is actually a character that never speaks in this game, but we still do need to interact and talk to him, quote unquote, at points during this quest. One of those times is going to be here, so we do need to walk up to Goldmask and press the interact button, and once we've done so we can then return to Corhyn and advise him of Goldmask's location. Again, after doing so we need to backtrack on ourselves and actually go back to Goldmask, to which you will find Corhyn and Goldmask together, speak with Corhyn here and also interact with Goldmask just to make sure. But once you exhaust all of Corhyn's dialogue, they will now move inside of Leyndell capital. So yes, you do need to progress your game to the point where you can access the capital of Leyndell, and then once you're inside they will actually be sat on a cliff face just outside of the Colosseum. So the best way to get to them is to work your way to the West Capital Rampart, Site of Grace, and then walk past the Gargoyle and head up the path to the Colosseum, but then wrap round all the way until you meet Corhyn and Goldmask. At this point, Corhyn will tell you that Goldmask is a bit stumped and he's wondering what the connection between Radagon and Marika is, and to find that out we need to obtain the Law of Regression incantation, and in order to do that we need to get the prayer book that is located in the Erdtree Sanctuary. So yes, again, you are going to need to defeat the Godfrey Phantom boss, and from the Site of Grace you can follow this path up the tree trunk, but instead of going to the Queen's Bedchamber as if you're going to fight Morgoth, if you simply hang a left and jump onto the roof, you can then go through the window, and by using this particular branch you can walk up to the chair that's hanging from the ceiling, and on that body will be the prayer book with the Law of Regression incantation inside. So with this book in hand we can go back to Corhyn and ask him to learn that particular incantation and purchase it off him for 10,000 runes. The only other caveat with this is that this incantation does require 37 points of intelligence to use it, but of course there are multiple different things that can boost your intelligence stat, like talismans, the wonder physic, and also other helmets in the game. But if you are struggling to get 37 intelligence, of course you can either respec or level up your character to make sure that you have enough points to use that particular incantation. And essentially once you've earned enough intelligence on your character to be able to use that incantation, we once again need to head down from the Erdtree Sanctuary Site of Grace and use the lift to head towards the Marika statue. When you're standing around this particular spot, if you use the Law of Regression, the statue will actually change into a Radagon statue, and there will be a new message that appears on the floor. It is imperative that you interact with this message, because that message does tell you that Marika is Radagon, and once you've read that message you can then head back to Corhyn and Goldmask and actually speak with Goldmask this time, not Corhyn, to tell him that Radagon is Marika. Again, once you've told this to Goldmask, speak with Corhyn and exhaust all of his dialogue, and they will now move on to their second to last location, which is in the mountain tops of the Giants. So again, progress your story, get to the mountain tops of the Giants, because on the bridge that is directly above the ancient Snow Valley ruin Site of Grace, you will be able to find Corhyn and Goldmask once more, to which you can exhaust Corhyn's dialogue and interact with Goldmask to prepare them to move to their final location. Now at this point Corhyn is having a bit of a breakdown and is losing trust in Goldmask and the Golden Order, and if you actually complete the Volcano Manor, and more specifically Tanith's questline, you can obtain an item called the Tonic of Forgetfulness, and that will dictate where Corhyn will end up at the end of this quest, because if you offer this tonic to Corhyn, he will actually stay behind and refuse to use the Forgetfulness tonic, but if you don't offer the tonic to him, he will actually move along with Goldmask to the final location in the capital of Ash. So yes, the next step for you to do after exhausting all of their dialogue here is to complete the Crumbling Farum Azula, defeat Malekith, and find them in the capital of Ash. They are actually going to be on the bottom layer of that Colosseum area, so if you remember where they were beforehand in the Leyndell capital, they're actually on the ledges down below. So if you follow this particular path that I'm going to be showing you on screen, you will actually be able to find Goldmask here no matter what. But like I say, if you did not offer the Tonic of Forgetfulness to Corhyn, Corhyn will also be here, but if you did offer the Tonic of Forgetfulness to him, he will actually still be in the mountain tops of the Giants on that bridge, and you can obviously go and speak to him afterwards. Either way, when you find Goldmask, he is actually going to have the Mending Rune of Perfect Order, and this is going to be yet another ending that you can use at the end of the game. But if you reload your game, you will also be able to pick up his armor, well I say armor, his clothing I should say, and if Corhyn is here as well, you'll be able to pick up his clothing and also his bell bearing. But if you go back to the mountain tops of the giants, you will be able to do that there. So like I say, whether or not you gave him the tonic, you'll need to find him in the respective place, and once you've collected all of those items and that Mending Rune of the Perfect Order, that will render both Corhyn's and Goldmask's questline fully complete. So like I said throughout this guide, just make sure that you're exhausting all of their dialogue, and if you're having trouble with that regression step, just make sure that you have 100% interacted with the new message that appears after using that incantation, and also make sure that you interact with Goldmask at pretty much every opportunity, because although he doesn't speak to you, you do actually need to interact with him sometimes to progress with this storyline. But now we've only got 2 more quests to talk about, and the second to last quest that I want to go through with you guys is going to be the entire Volcano Manor questline. So yes, with this particular quest, there's going to be 4 NPCs involved. You've got Lady Tanith, Patches, Raya the Scout, and also Beryl. And just before we go any further, with Beryl and Patches, you can actually miss their missions entirely, so I will obviously point out what you need to do to make sure that you don't miss out on their respective quests. With that said, we need to of course start the quest line in the first place, and I highly recommend that you actually meet Patches first, because you can do so almost immediately in your game, as he is located in Murkwater Cave. As you can see on screen, this cave is located to the north of a Gill Lake, and once you go inside, you will be able to access a boss arena, which is where you are going to meet Patches. Once in here, you need to open up the chest to get Patches to spawn in, and the caveat with this boss fight is to get him down to around about 50% health, and do not kill him because he will surrender and become a friendly NPC. And once he does so and surrenders, you can then exhaust his dialogue, to which he will then move on to the Volcano Manor. But to gain access to the Volcano Manor, we actually need to meet Raya the Scout, and she is located in the Liurnia of the Lakes, more specifically in this particular gazebo just sort of northwest from the Lakeshire ruins. After you find her for the first time and speak to her, she will explain that she's had her necklace taken from her, and she asks you for your help to obviously go and get it back. This necklace was actually taken by the Blackguard NPC, who is going to be residing in the Boil Prawn Shack, which is literally just sort of northwest from Raya's current location. So if you just head in this sort of like straight path, you will come to an abandoned small little shack, and round the back will be Blackguard, to which you can speak to him and pay 1,000 runes to get the necklace. Once you obtain the necklace, obviously head back to Raya, and she will actually give you an invitation to come and join the Volcano Manor. And once you obtain this letter, we then simply need to work our way to the Altus Plateau, and you can do that either by getting the 2 halves of the medallion to then use the Dectus lift. Those 2 halves of the medallion are in Fort Height and Fort Feroth respectively, or you can work your way through the ruin-strewn precipice and defeat the Magma Worm Makar boss to then come out by the Erdtree Gazing Hill site of grace. Essentially, after giving you the invitation, Raya will either appear at the Dectus lift once you've used it to go up to the Altus Plateau, or she will appear at the Erdtree Gazing Hill. So, like I say, you can find her in one of these 2 locations, and once you do so, you can speak to her, to which she will ask you to take her hand so that she can take you to the Volcano Manor. Of course, accept that proposal, and you will be teleported straight into the middle of Volcano Manor. At this point, if you've spoken to Patches, you can rest at this site of grace, and then he should appear in the corridor behind you. But you can also speak to Lady Tanith and become an official member of the Volcano Manor, to which she will give you the drawing key so you can open up all of the doors down this particular corridor. Once you open up the door to the dining room, you will be able to see Raya along with Beryl sat in this chair, and various items that you can pick up from the table in front of them. Now, just to be clear, these items on the table are going to be various assassination requests. And if you remember me saying at the very beginning of this particular quest line, it is actually possible to miss the rest of Patch's questline, as well as completely missing Beryl's quest. This is because if you do too many of these assassination requests, you will be teleported into the Rykard fight, and if you happen to beat Rykard, both Patches and Beryl will be no longer seen at the Volcano Manor. So, in order to make sure that you don't miss anything, I advise doing the first 2 contracts. That is because you actually need to do the first 2 contracts to accept the missions from both Patches and also Beryl. So when you first get to the Volcano Manor, like I say, accept Lady Tanith's proposal to become a member, and then pick up the first contract from that table in the dining room. Invade the NPC in Limgrave, which you can find using the red marker on your map, and then once you beat that first NPC, return to Lady Tanith, accept your reward, and then you'll have a second contract on that same table. Go to that new location you've been given, defeat that NPC, return to Lady Tanith again once you've done so, and collect your second reward, and then now you can speak to Patches and Beryl, and they will both give you their respective contracts, to which you can now invade optional NPCs. These are all very straightforward because, like I say, all of their locations are going to be on the map, so if you simply follow those markers, so going to the Magma Worm Makar area for Patch's quest, and then also going to the Round Table Hold in Lionel Capital for Beryl's quest, invade those NPCs, and not only will you get the respective armors, but if you go back to Patches and Beryl in the Volcano Manor, you can exhaust their dialogue once more and obtain their unique rewards and complete both of their side quests simultaneously. And then essentially, once you've done both Patches and Beryl's questline, it is now time to complete Raya's quest, as again, if you go too far and beat Rykard, you will then prevent the ability to complete her quest. You can now speak to Raya and also refresh multiple times and exhaust her dialogue. Do this multiple times and make sure that you rest at the site of grace after exhausting her dialogue each time, and she will eventually move to her own room, which is on the right hand side of the corridor, to which she is actually in her snake form. Again, speak to her about her transformation, and after exhausting her dialogue, you can then speak to Lady Tanith, to which she will tell you that she is her adopted child. During your conversations with Raya, she did also make note of some noises that were coming from the room next to her, and if you go into that room to the right of her room and roll into the back right wall, that will disappear, revealing an alleyway behind these particular rooms. This is how you get to the outside of the Volcano Manor, and if we go a step further and defeat the Noble Skin boss in this area, which is in the Temple of Igle, you will be able to pick up the Serpent's Amnion, which is essentially the shell from which Raya was born. Obviously, collect this item after defeating the Noble Skin boss, and again, speak to Raya and show her this Amnion, to which now of course she understands that Lady Tanith is not her true mother, and will then move deeper into Volcano Manor herself. At this point, if you rest at the site of grace, you can speak to Lady Tanith again about Raya's absence, and this is the point where Lady Tanith gives you the Tonic of Forgetfulness. This tonic can be used on various other characters, but of course for this specific quest, Lady Tanith is asking us to use it on Raya, so she forgets everything and everything goes back to normal. As I mentioned before, Raya at this point has moved to a brand new location inside of Volcano Manor, and it's right next to the Temple of Igle site of grace, and I'm just going to show you how to get there because it is a little bit hard to explain, so feel free to slow this portion of the video down or pause at a point so you know where you're going. But essentially, from the Temple of Igle site of grace, you need to wrap around and head further up the manor to the point where you come to this walkway. Once you're here, you can then drop down and you'll see a little room to which Raya is located. Now, when you talk to Raya here, she is going to ask you for one final wish, and that is actually to kill her, because to her, she is an abomination that has been created by Lady Tanith. So at this point, we can do one of 3 things. Obviously, do that request and finish Raya's quest right here, right now, or we can give her the Tonic of Forgetfulness, to which then she'll go back to everything being normal like how it was before, or we can do none of the above and leave her at this location and complete the last assassination contract and defeat Rykard. If you do that last option, Raya will then escape the Volcano Manor and leave you a note and the Dectus Woe behind, and is considered sort of like the true ending of her questline. But again, you can do any one of those 3 options, but once you've done one of those 3, you do, like I say, need to complete the 3rd contract anyway, and then after you've done that 3rd contract, you then need to defeat Rykard which is the boss of the Volcano Manor. You have to use the Serpent Hunter, which is a weapon you actually pick up in the boss arena, and once you've defeated Rykard with that weapon, you can go back to Lady Tanith and tell her the deed is done. But then if you head back to the Rykard boss arena, you can find Lady Tanith devouring his head, to which you can hit her, making her disappear, and her Crucible Knight will spawn in to obviously try and take you down. But if you defeat the Crucible Knight, you will get the breath aspect of Crucible incantation, and then where Tanith was located when you hit her, you can also pick up the Consort set. And essentially by completing Beryl and Patches' contract, as well as going through Rhyhorn of Discovery and beating Rykard and Tanith, you will have completed the entire Volcano Manor storyline, and both Patches and Beryl will also move away from the Volcano Manor, leaving the manor as some sort of like empty shell. Again, apologies, I probably haven't explained too much lore-wise. I'm of course just showing you the quickest steps to complete everything, but by doing all of the contracts and obviously defeating Tanith at the end, you get all kinds of different rewards as well as all of the different armors, so the Volcano Manor is definitely worth completing in its fullest to get all of these incredible items. Now we've got one last quest to go through, and that is arguably probably one of the better quest lines in the game, which is going to be Fia's quest line. And again, with this particular one, we're also going to have characters D, the Beholder of Death, and also Sorcerer Rogier intertwined with this particular quest line. But other than that, this quest does not affect any other characters or any other quest lines in the game, and it can be done at any point. However, those two other characters that I mentioned, Rogier and D, do have missable steps if you go too far in your game. That is because to essentially start the quest and get everything going together, you need to do a series of different things, and this includes beating Starscourge Radahn and also Godric the Grafted. Essentially, once you progress your story enough in the game, you will have Fia, Rogier and D all residing in the Round Table Hold, and the reason why you need to defeat Radahn is because that is the trigger point to access certain dialogue with Fia that also allows you to speak to D and Rogier about certain events in the game. But whilst you're also working your way to defeat Radahn, I also advise that you pick up a death root along the way. Of course, one of the easiest death roots to obtain is to defeat the Tibia Marina boss that is residing in the Summon Water Village, because when you obtain your first death root, you can actually take that to D in the Round Table Hold, to which he will introduce you to Goronk, who is residing in the Bestial Sanctum in Caelid. Again, when you show him the death root, he will put a marker on the map for a teleporter that will take you to Goronk, and essentially with this sort of like side quest, you need to be bringing Goronk every single death root in the game, and he will obviously reward you with each one that you bring, but at the very end you will also get an Ancient Somber Smithing Stone. But like I say, you can complete that sort of like side quest, if you will, as you're progressing through this main quest, because once you do defeat Radahn and speak to Fia, she will actually hand you a weathered dagger and ask you to find its former owner. Once you've received this dagger from Fia, you can then speak to D about the dagger and he will gladly take it off your hands. Now, at this point is where you would usually speak to Rogier and he will tell you about the Black Knife Catacombs, but for some reason in my game, maybe it's because I had already gone to the Altus Plateau, I seem to have somehow skipped that step entirely, and when I reloaded the Round Table Hold, D was missing and actually found dead in this separate room past Roderica and Hugh. This is supposed to be the next step after finding the Black Knife Catacombs, but like I say, it seems that because I've gone to the Altus Plateau before doing that specific step, my game just sort of like automatically skipped past it and moved on with the quest. But if you haven't gone to Altus Plateau yet, just to explain, you will need to speak to Rogier and exhaust all of his dialogue about the Black Knife Catacombs, and more specifically the Black Knife Print, and then after speaking to Rogier, if you speak to Fia, she will basically give you a map with the location for those catacombs. But it is right here, I'm going to show you on the map anyway, and inside the Black Knife Catacomb there is going to be a secret Black Knife boss. When you come to this room with the dropping swords, you can ride one of them up to this ledge on the left hand side, and following that path round you will come to what seems to be a dead end, but if you roll or hit the wall in front of you, that is of course an illusionary wall, revealing the golden fog wall behind it, and inside that fog wall is this secret boss. And then once you defeat the Black Knife Assassin, you'll be given the Black Knife knife fingerprint, to which you can then take that back to Rogier to complete his side of this quest. But either way, like I said, if you move to the Altus Plateau, Dee does meet his peril, and Fia will be in the room with him, but it is also imperative that you exhaust her dialogue here and also pick up Dee's armor. That is because the next step in this quest is to go down to Nokron using the Starfall crater that was opened up after beating Radahn, and from the Ancestral Woods site of grace you can head through the woodland and come out to an opening past the jellyfish, which is actually going to be the Siofra Aqueduct. In this area is going to be the twin gargoyle boss fights, but just before you enter that arena, there is going to be Dee's twin brother sat whimpering outside of that boss room. As long as you picked up Dee's armor set, you can actually interact with Dee's twin brother and give him the armor set for himself. Again, once you have done this, Dee's brother actually becomes available to summon for the twin gargoyle fights, so it's actually in your best interest to do this anyway, as he will lend a very helping hand to defeat what is quite an annoying boss fight. But whether you decide to bring Dee's brother in or not, you do need to defeat these twin gargoyles, because after you defeat them, you can use the coffin at the end of their boss room to teleport yourself to the Deep Root depths. From this point, you will need to work your way to the Nameless Eternal City, so going over the various branches and heading north to find that city, because once you're here, again, you can use the various branches to work your way up to this particular ledge, where you will find the Across the Roots site of grace. This site of grace is just outside of, again, another boss arena, this time being Fia's champions, and when you get close enough to the opposite end of this boss arena, you will be encased and forced to fight multiple NPCs. There are going to be 3 rounds with 5 NPCs in total. The first 2 rounds are just going to be 1 other NPC, but then the last round is going to be 3 NPCs fighting you at once, so definitely make sure that you're prepared. But once you defeat these champions, Fia will then present herself on that sort of like little ledge in front of you, and again, you can speak to her here, and after exhausting all of her dialogue, she will let you know that she is searching for the curse mark of death. So now at this stage in Fia's quest, you need to complete Ranni's quest all the way up until you get the curse mark of death, which is located in the Divine Tower of Liurnia, which you can only get to after turning the study hall upside down. So again, if you're unaware of exactly how to do that, feel free to check out the Ranni questline now, and then obviously come back to this once you've understood how to get the curse mark. But once you do obtain the curse mark of death, you can speak to Fia once more, and then ensuring that you've exhausted all of her dialogue, you need to use the site of grace that's also right next to Fia to reload your game, and she would have fallen asleep. Again, you may need to refresh your game and rest at this site of grace multiple times, and this is kind of like the most frustrating part of Fia's quest, because it does take a little while to enter and exit the animation to talk to her, as you need to be held in secret to do so. But as long as you've exhausted a dialogue 2 or 3 times, she will then eventually fall asleep, and you can interact with her body to then enter the deathbed dream and take on Fortisax. Again, you need to defeat this boss, and it is a little bit tough, especially with all of the lightning and deathblight attacks happening. So again, definitely bring a weapon that's going to pack an absolute punch. But once you do defeat Fortisax, you'll be teleported straight back to Fia, where you'll be able to pick up the Mending Rune of the Death Prince. But that's not all, because if you decide to rest one more time at that site of grace, Dee's twin brother will arrive, and he would have actually slain Fia, allowing you to pick up her clothing. And then at this point, you can either decide to defeat Dee's brother or just simply reload the game by resting at the site of grace again. And when you do one of the 2 things, Dee's brother would have left behind the twinned armor set as well as the inseparable sword, and essentially once you've got all of those items, that will render Fia's questline complete. And just like that, if you've gone through this entire video, video, you would have completed all of the main NPC quest lines. And yes, there's probably a few of you out there that know there's a few more NPCs out in the lands between, but in all honesty, those NPCs aren't really anybody that's going to give you an item of any significance. And in this video, we've basically covered every single ending that you can get, as well as showing you all of the quest lines that are actually worth your time to complete, because they will all be giving you some form of valuable item, whether that be a really cool armor piece, weapon, or like I say, alternative ending for your games. Now, I can't lie, obviously I still need to edit this video at the time of doing this voiceover, but from what I've recorded so far, I imagine this video is going to be very close to the 2-hour mark. And if you are still listening to this, firstly, thank you for making it all the way to the end. Like I said in the intro, feel free to bookmark this video, save it, and come back to it at a later date if you ever need to recall the steps for certain quest lines. I know what I'm about to say isn't going to make much sense if you're watching this really far in the future, but I'm sorry there hasn't been too many videos out on the channel recently. As you can probably tell, this one has taken up my life for the past week or two, but nonetheless it's all worth it, as like I say, you've got every single valuable quest all in one place. Of course, if you don't mind me asking, if you found this video useful in any way, then please be sure to hit that like button. It really does help out the channel tremendously, and by hitting the like button, you're also going to be telling me that you want to see a similar video for all of the DLC quests when we of course get the Shadow of the Erdtree later this month. But for now, I think I've taken up more than enough of your guys' time. Again, a big thank you for watching this video, I really do appreciate it, but other than that, I've said everything that I need to. I'm gonna go rest my voice now, but I guess I will catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.